Daniel was very quiet all the rest of the day, prompting several people at the office to ask if he was all right. There was a welcome back e-card on his desk when he got there, which he pulled the batteries out of without even pausing to look at who all had signed it. Brian was apparently taking the day off, but around 3 in the afternoon, Azra rolled her chair back into his cubicle in imitation of Daniel's method of commuting to her desk. "Hey, Daniel," she said. Daniel pulled out one of his earphones, pretending that he'd been listening to music. "Hi," he said. "It's good to have you back," she said. "Have you talked to Suzanne yet?" Daniel ground his teeth. "No, I haven't. Should I?" Azra shrugged. "She said she wanted to see you." "She can wait." "I doubt that's a good idea. She's been waiting all day. Didn't you read the card?" "No." He sighed and saved the code he was working on. "Fine, I'll go see her. Thanks, Azra." "Daniel," she said, arresting him as he stood from his desk. When he looked at her, her expression was a strange mixture of discomfort and wry amusement. "We were all scared half to death when we heard. All of us. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask, all right? We're here for you." The hard knot of resentment in Daniel's chest loosened. "Thanks, Azra. That means a lot." "Take care, Daniel." She scooted away back to her own desk. Daniel walked to Suzanne King's office like he was walking to the gallows, his steps slow and measured. "Well, this is it," he thought. "This is where I get fired." He took a steadying breath and knocked. "In!" Suzanne snapped from inside. Daniel entered. She looked up from her desk. She looked haggard, bedraggled, possibly as though she hadn't slept in a few days. "Rodriguez," she said, with something that might have been relief. "Sit down, please." Daniel almost pinched himself, unable to believe the words or the tone. Dazed, he sat. "I wanted to apologize," Suzanne said after a moment of silence. "I try to keep a safe workplace, and I can't help feeling responsible for your accident in some way." Swallowing heavily, Daniel waited for the but, the trailing end that would tell him he was a liability and could not be kept around any longer. "As such, I'll make sure you receive full pay for the days you spent recuperating. I'm also having a full investigation launched into the cause of the nitrogen fill." "It wasn't a leak?" Daniel blurted. Suzanne raised an eyebrow. "No, Rodriguez, it wasn't a leak." "Oh." Suzanne King sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Sorry, Rodriguez, I've had health and safety riding my ass 24/7 for the past 2 days. Speaking of which, they want a testimony from you about the situation." She looked up at him, her gray eyes starkly colorless against a bloodshot background. "I'd appreciate it if you didn't cast me in too villainous a light." That's why she's being so nice, Daniel realized, the connection snapping into place in his brain. She's afraid of losing her job. "Of course," Daniel managed. "Nothing but the truth, Miss King." "I know I've treated you like dirt," Daniel supplied. This could be fun, he thought. Wonder how she likes a taste of her own medicine. Suzanne sighed heavily, her jaw clenching. "I wouldn't put it like that, but if that's how you feel, I can't contradict you. And I am sorry. I get 150 coders through here a day. I manage almost 4,000 of them. Sometimes I forget they're all human." "That's okay," Daniel said flippantly. "Most of the time we assume you're not human either." She glared at him for a long moment, and his heart stuttered in his chest. Too far, too far, too far. Suddenly, Suzanne King did something Daniel had never seen her do before, nor even thought her capable of. She laughed. It wasn't much of a laugh, but that's certainly what it was, and it was accompanied by a smile. I suppose it's no less than I deserve, she admitted. Back to work, Rodriguez. I don't pay you for honesty. Yes, ma'am, Daniel replied, and sauntered out of the office. What do you know, he thought. She's human after all. He spent the next hour smiling smugly to himself, until the gravity of his situation slowly overcame him again. He wondered, as his code compiled, who could have tried to kill him, who would have wanted to, and, more worryingly, whether Minami had started dating him solely because her conspiracy club needed a coder. The thought made him furious, as it had that morning, but he only decided to say something about it when the assertiveness materials from the Department of Psychiatry arrived, again, in his email box. They must have been keeping track of whether or not it got opened. He only briefly considered that confronting Minami about the issue might be a bad idea, until he convinced himself that he had been doing nothing but avoiding confrontation for the past 6 months. He'd had enough of passivity, and if his experience with Suzanne King was anything to go by, standing up for himself would only make his life better. So it was that when Minami asked to meet him for dinner, he agreed without stipulations. You're late, Minami admonished, one hand on her hip. I'm buying, Daniel retorted, so don't complain. Minami rolled her eyes at him. Christ, you don't have to bite my head off. Come on, the sooner we get a table, the sooner we can eat. It wasn't long before Minami noticed there was something wrong. The server hadn't even come back for their food orders after bringing them their drinks. All right, Daniel, she said at last, leaning her elbows on the table and her chin on her hands. What's wrong? He'd intended not to have this conversation in public, but the words leapt off his tongue before he could stop them. You used me, he accused. 11 months ago. Does that number mean anything to you? 11 months ago, you started looking for a coder for your little group. 11 months ago, you picked me out and decided I was enough of a sucker to do anything a pretty girl asked me to. I've had it with lies, Minami. I've had it with being manipulated. That's what's wrong. Minami stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she sighed and squeezed her temples. Can we not talk about this in public? She asked quietly. No, Daniel answered. We talk about it now, or I walk away. Fine, she said. When I met you, I was looking for a coder. That's why I was standing outside the NDC. But when you looked at me, there was something else, you know? I didn't just want to be around you because we needed a coder. I just wanted to be around you. She chuckled softly to herself. I think it was the second time you walked me home that I decided I might be in love with you. Daniel was stunned. Minami, he said. That was 8 months ago. I know, she replied. Those next 2 months were extremely difficult. But Alan says a lot of things, Minami replied. Did you stop to wonder why I waited 11 months to bring you into the group? It was because I was still looking for another coder. Because I didn't want to get you involved in something dangerous. She looked up at him, eyes boring into his head. Because I love you, Daniel. He stood up suddenly before quite realizing what his legs were doing. I'll see you around, he said, and walked away, not waiting for any response from her, not even caring that he was going home without supper, not even caring that he was abandoning her there on her own in her pretty dress and her sparkly makeup. He found himself incapable of caring about much of anything. As he walked home under the brilliant blue street lamps, he turned it all over and over in his head, like a rock polisher left to grind gemstones to sand. He thought about Suzanne King, about the upcoming investigation, about the possibility of losing his job. He thought about how close he'd come to dying, and who could possibly have tried to kill him. He thought about Alan and Phoenix and Brian. He thought about Minami, how good it had felt to kiss her, to hold her, to ease himself inside of her, and about how much he hated being pushed around, how helpless and useless and scraggly and shabby he looked and felt in comparison to her, about how demanding she could be and how selfish, about the color of her eyes and the smell of her hair and the second time he had walked her home. It all spun through his head, one thought spilling over the next, rattling and tumbling and shivering through his mind. So when the man grabbed him from behind on a deserted side street and jabbed a needle into his arm, he was scarcely able to process what was happening before the tranquilizer had pumped his mind full of darkness. He woke up cold and muzzy and not alone. There was a man standing in shadow across from him, his outline growing slowly less blurry as Daniel dragged himself back to consciousness. "What?" Daniel said. He tried to brush his hair out of his eyes and found that he was handcuffed to his chair. His breath stalled out in his lungs and his heart stuttered. Instinctively, he jerked against the restraints, thrashing in his chair until the handcuffs bit through the skin of his wrists. This kind of thing didn't happen in real life, not to people like him, not here, not now. But it was happening. He knew he wasn't dreaming. His head hurt too badly for it to be a dream. He looked down at his hands, now bloodied, but viciously real. The pain in his wrists was awfully real, too. His hair had fallen in front of his eyes and was sticking to his face unpleasantly. His stomach was twinging with hunger, but queasy from whatever they had used to knock him out. His whole left shoulder ached from the injection. "Wake up," he willed himself. "Please, please, wake up." "Good morning, Daniel," the man in the shadows said. His voice was soft and cheerful. "Sleep well?" "What the fuck?" Daniel panted hoarsely, breaking out in a cold sweat. The only light in the room was shining right in his face. He couldn't even see where he was. But the room was small, judging by the acoustics, and it smelled of bleach. He tried to keep those things in mind in case he could get a call for help out. "Well, you'll be all right soon enough. So Daniel, tell me, what is Project 9441? If he'd been fighting down panic before, now he was fighting down absolute terror. "What?" he squeaked. I don't know what you're—" Something cold and metallic pressed against the nape of his neck. There was an ominous click. "Let me rephrase that. Tell me everything you know about Project 9441, or my associate is going to splatter your brains all over this room." For a moment, Daniel couldn't breathe. They were going to kill him. He had a sudden conviction that he was never going to leave this tiny, dark, bleach-smelling room alive. He started crying. They were going to kill him, and there was nothing he could do. Everything he'd done, everything he'd planned, everything he was about to be cut off in a messy, red bang. The void loomed up before him, vast and implacable and far, far too close. I don't... Whoever was behind him struck him, hard. His ears rang and he saw sparks. Warm liquid crept across his scalp and down his neck. The man in the shadows had crossed to him and yanked his head back by the hair, pressing the barrel of a gun into the soft flesh just under his jaw. "Listen up, you Mexican piece of shit," You've got 10 fucking seconds to start talking.
I'm Venezuelan,
Daniel stammered woozily. The man struck him across the face with the gun, leaving a huge, stinging ache on Daniel's right cheek. His eye started to swell shut. 5, the man said. 4, 3, 2...
Containment protocol!
Daniel squeaked, his heart pounding in his ears as though desperate to remind him of what he was about to lose. A bang, an awful, tearing pain, and then nothing.
Rail shutdowns, red flagging, watchwords, face recognition, I can't remember what else.
What were the watchwords?
I don't...
The cold barrel of the gun was pressing a small circle of pain into Daniel's jaw. He was crying in earnest now, blubbering his words out as coherently as he could manage, which wasn't very.
Things like, Phoenix, Big Brother, and Anarchy, and,
He tried to swallow and couldn't because of the gun under his pharynx.
I think terror or something like that.
His whole body was trembling. He could barely breathe.
Please,
he whispered hoarsely.
Please, I just want to go home. I never meant to get involved with any of this. It just...
Shut up, the man snapped. Daniel bit his lip and squeezed his eyes shut, trying not to whimper in terror. Tears were flowing freely down his face, stinging against a small cut in his cheek from where the man had struck him. The back of his head was bloodied and aching as well. All right, Daniel. Here's how this is going to go. We're going to give you a ride home, drop you off nice and cozy, and you are not going to call the peacekeepers. You're not going to call anybody. You're going to pretend this never happened. But you're never, and I mean never, going to go poking your little brown nose where it doesn't belong, ever again. Because I'm under no obligation not to shoot you, Daniel, and neither is my associate. And I will shoot you. You open your mouth about this, or about Project 9441, to anybody, and you'll find a gun in it. Do I make myself clear?
Yes, sir,
Daniel whispered, shaking like a leaf in the wind. Very good. We'll be in touch, Daniel. Night-night. Then there was a pricking sensation in his aching shoulder, and then darkness.